Michella Chester here for NCAA Digital. I am joined by Adam Kramer, a senior college football writer for Bleacher Report. Adam, we've got a rematch for the national championship, Alabama versus Georgia in the title game. Obviously, Georgia was the number one team season all along, but Bama dismantled their defense in the SEC title game, but quite the bounce back performance for Georgia against Michigan. They just bullied Michigan's offensive line all game long. So what changes did Georgia make defensively, if any, in the semifinals? Or was it Bryce Young? Was that the difference?
Yeah, it's a mix of things. I do think, though, you mentioned it in terms of bullying that offensive line. You could tell within the first 90 seconds of that game that I think Michigan was going to have a hard time matching the intensity and the athletes of Georgia. So not just, Jordan Davis in the middle, who was great, but the Kobe Dean, who played, I thought, one of the best games we've seen a defensive player all season. That really was the difference. And that's what we saw all year. Okay, this is the team I picked to win the national title. Small flex. You knew it was coming. It was a matter of when.
I think you deserve the flex.
Well, thank you. But this is what we saw, and this is what a historic defense was doing until Bryce Young. And that was the difference. The extension of plays, Georgia didn't allow any of that. And then the other thing, too, we talk so much about the Georgia defense. Give that Georgia offense some credit, right? It wants to play small ball. It wants to wear you down. Big plays, big creative plays to the tight end, to the running back. I thought the play calling was great. And obviously the defense was brilliant, which was the expectation outside of one very important game. Of course, very meaningful game now as we get into the rematch.
So you said Bryce Young was the difference. How do they adjust in the title game for Georgia?
Well, the big thing in the SEC championship game, Bryce Young has been really careful with when he runs. He ran for, I think it was like 40 yards in that previous game, but they were such meaningful yards. So what he wants to do is extend plays. And I think the thing in the SEC championship game, Bryce Young ran a little bit more than we're used to him seeing, but the way that he was able just, evade pressure, allow his wide receivers to get open, it crushed Georgia in that game. They have to find a way to corral him. And I'll be quite honest, Cincinnati did a really good job of it. Cincinnati showed the blueprint of how to get pressure from the outside to keep him in the pocket. And for the first time in a long time, Bryce Young looked uncomfortable. Now, he still made a couple of really remarkable throws. But if I'm Georgia, they've studied their own tape of how they failed against Bryce Young previously. I think there's some takeaways that Cincinnati did that they're going to look at and say, how do we duplicate that effort? Which, again, Cincinnati, tough game, group of five team, wonderful season. There's a lot of good takeaways from that game that they did to slow down a Heisman winner who really no one could slow down prior to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you touch on that Cincy game. I want to expand on that. Bama took a really run-heavy approach against Cincinnati. Brian Robertson Jr. had a career day. What do you expect their offensive approach to be against UGA compared to that Cincy game and compared to their SEC title game against Georgia?
Well, credit to Brian Robertson Jr., who was banged up toward the end of the year. Clearly not 100%. I think the extra time off really served him well and really served them well. He was out of breath. Of course he was. Like, he ran for over 200 yards and had not been doing it because he had to get his body right. That's not going to work against Georgia. Now, they could still find success. I think it's critical for Alabama to lean on him, but I don't think they're going to be able to create these massive holes like they did against Cincinnati. The concern, I think, in this game, if you're Bama, the run blocking was exceptional. Now, is that a difference in size, difference in athlete? Alabama, no offense to Cincinnati. These are Alabama massive men that were able to create these holes. The pass blocking was not great. Was not great in that game. Again, the offensive line was wonderful against Georgia in the first time. Wasn't great against Cincinnati. So I think the strategy is going to be a mix. That was kind of the old school pre-Lane Kiffin, Nick Saban football, which was defense and running and sit on the football for a really long time, and it worked. I don't think you're going to be able to rely on Brian Robinson to run for 200 yards against Georgia. If you are, and you can duplicate that effort, then obviously Alabama's probably going to win that game.
So how about Stetson Bennett Jr.? Would you say he erased any doubts with his semifinal performance?
Yeah. And I'm willing to say I've been calling for JT Daniels to see the field throughout this year. It's been a little bit odd. Injuries, of course, have not done him well. But after that game against Alabama, I thought Bennett looked just frankly a little bit shook. I think after a couple of turnovers, still put up some big yardage, still had some big plays. And that was a game that they were up 10-0 in. Like, frankly, the SEC championship game for that first 10 minutes, we were like, yeah, Georgia's going to cruise. They were unable to do it. I thought a couple of those passes to James Cook were brilliant. I thought the way that, we talk about Bryce Young extending plays. I think there's an element to Bennett's game that is really exceptional when you talk about the way that he can move in and out of the pocket, but more so really those deep down the field passes that were perfectly placed. He's got that bravado, right? It's a little bit of cockiness, not a negative thing at all. He carries himself in a way that I think he can make himself an easy target if he doesn't play well. We got to give him credit when he does. I thought he was brilliant in a really meaningful spot and threw some absolute dimes down the field.
Absolutely. So I want to ask you this. Georgia or Bama will win if. What's the X factor for each team?
For Alabama, and these two things are kind of related. Alabama, I think, they're going to win with another superhuman effort from Bryce Young. I mean, he had over 400 total yards of offense, but they're down their second best wide receiver, John Mechie. I thought that absence was evident against Cincinnati, quite honestly. Williams, of course, is great for them at wideout. They've got some, 4- and 5-star players trying to step up. It's a good situation to be in, but still, Bryce Young played one of the most spectacular football games I've ever seen from a quarterback. And I'm not saying he has to be that good to beat Georgia. That Alabama defense is special. Will Anderson, they've got some really, really great players. So let's not put it all on Bryce Young. But I think he has to play at a Heisman level for them to win again. That's how much I think of Georgia. And for Georgia, I think, yes, containing Bryce Young, but that's kind of a lazy answer since we just talked about Bryce Young. I think they've got to be creative with their offense, right? Alabama's probably going to score. The element of this is once Alabama started scoring, Georgia couldn't keep up. So it's not just Bennett, but Brock Bowers, the tight end. They got to find ways to get him the ball. He is one of the best young tight ends we've seen. James Cook, they got to find ways to get him the ball. So I think Georgia, if they can spread the ball around and get it to these superb athletes that they have, yes, and stop Bryce Young, then I think Georgia has a really good chance to erase all the doubt and all the negatives that came from that first game.
All right, and what's your prediction for the title game?
All right, now I'm going to look like a homer, like a self-serving homer when I say that Georgia's going to win, but I do believe it. I think that this is a team, you could question a lot of things about the first game, right? And you got to give a lot of credit to Alabama and Bryce Young, of course, but I do wonder with a team that was in the playoff already, if the urgency was the same. And that's a hard thing to do, to question motivation, of course, in all of these games. But I do think there's going to be a new level of urgency. And by the way, there's also something to be said about just taking somebody's absolute best punch, getting knocked down, and then getting another crack at them again. I think this Georgia team is different. I think a month of watching the failures from the previous game are going to certainly help. And I just think this is a roster that is Alabama-like that they've built. It did not play that way in their first game. But I look at just all these pieces coming together at the right time, the defense figuring something out in this game, and then the injuries, frankly, to Alabama. I do think that Mechie loss, we saw it in the second half against Georgia where the offense is not the same. I think it's asking a lot of a younger roster, albeit a really talented younger roster, to step up in this type of game. So I do like Georgia. It is a bit of a homer pick, trying to go wire to wire with my selection here, but I also believe it. I think the Bulldogs find a way to win, and what a win it would be for a fan base that obviously has been waiting for this breakthrough, right? That's been, if not now, then when, it feels like for Georgia. I think the when is now.
Well, you picked it over a year ago, so you got to stick with something, right? I like it. Adam,
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it as always.
Thank you so much. Talk soon.